The small frontier town of Red Creek usually began its morning slowly. Sunlight touched the wooden roofs, the dusty roads warmed up, and people stepped out of their homes to start another ordinary day. Most folks knew one another by name, and they greeted each other with friendly nods. Children often ran around near the well, and shopkeepers arranged goods outside their stores while chatting with neighbors. It was the kind of town where people felt safe because they believed nothing truly terrible could happen under the watch of Sheriff Coleman. Sheriff Henry Coleman had been serving Red Creek for more than 10 years. He was respected for being steady, calm, and fair. People liked him because he listened to them and treated everyone with the same honesty. His tall figure and gentle eyes made him approachable, even for strangers passing through. Many in the town said that Red Creek stayed peaceful because Sheriff Coleman made wise decisions and stayed alert, especially during times when trouble seemed to drift across the countryside. He lived with his daughter Emily, who was the closest person to his heart. Emily was a bright and warm-natured young woman, always ready to help anyone in need. She often visited neighbors, carried things for the elderly, and taught small children how to read. Everyone admired her kindness, and many believed she had inherited her father's calm spirit. She also had a little sense of adventure, which sometimes made the sheriff worry. But he trusted her judgment. Life in Red Creek moved gently, but the sheriff always kept one part of his mind alert. The reason for his caution was a group of outlaws who had been moving across the region. People whispered their leader's name with unease: Reeve Dalton. He was known not for loud threats but for unpredictable actions. His group traveled from place to place, taking advantage of quiet areas where people did not expect trouble. Most of the townsfolk had only heard distant stories about Dalton's gang. But the sheriff had seen enough danger in his career to know that every rumor, even a small one, deserved attention. The sheriff tried not to worry Emily with these thoughts. He wanted her to enjoy life without fear. Still, he always reminded her to stay within safe areas and to return home before sunset. Emily respected him, so she usually followed his advice. One bright morning, Emily planned to go on a short errand with her friend Sarah. They needed to pick up some supplies from a nearby farm where Sarah's relatives lived. It was a routine trip they had made before, and the road was considered safe. Emily told her father before leaving, and the sheriff gave them his usual gentle reminder to be careful. "Take the left route near the creek," he said. "It's quieter and easier for the horses." Emily smiled and nodded. "We'll be home before afternoon, Father." The sheriff watched them leave, standing at the doorway with a sense of pride. Emily's soft laughter carried through the air as their wagon rolled away. He felt a small comfort knowing Sarah was with her. Both girls had grown up together, shared many memories, and trusted each other. The first part of the journey was peaceful. Birds rested on tree branches, and a warm breeze moved through the tall grass. Emily and Sarah talked about small things about schoolchildren. Emily had helped, about Sarah's aunt sewing a new quilt, about the weather turning warmer than usual. It was the kind of conversation that made the hours pass easily. What they didn't know was that someone else was watching. Far above on a rocky ridge, Dalton's men observed the wagon through binoculars. They had been hiding for days, waiting for the right moment to strike, not at random, but with purpose. Their leader had learned that the sheriff of Red Creek was known for his sense of justice, and Dalton wanted to weaken him, to shake his confidence in the law. Taking something valuable from him was the easiest way to do it. Emily did not know any of this. She continued talking with Sarah, enjoying the weather. They had no reason to think danger was near. The road felt too familiar and too calm to suspect an ambush. As the wagon moved into a narrow part of the trail, the girls slowed down. The path was surrounded by trees that cast shadows across the ground. It looked quiet, almost too quiet. Sarah noticed it first. "Emily," she whispered. "Do you hear anything?" Emily listened. The wind had stopped. No birds chirped. Even the horse seemed uneasy. Before they could react, several men stepped out from behind the trees. They didn't shout. They didn't make loud movements. Instead, they surrounded the wagon in a controlled and unsettling way. One of them gently took the horse's reins, while another blocked the road. Emily and Sarah both froze, unsure of what to say. A tall man with sharp eyes approached. His voice was calm, but his presence felt heavy. "You're Sheriff Coleman's daughter," he said, looking directly at Emily. Emily's heart pounded. "Why do you want me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "That's not for you to worry about," the man replied. "You just need to come with us." Sarah tried to speak up, but one of the men warned her with a gesture to stay silent. Emily realized they were prepared, organized, and determined. She understood that resisting might cause harm, and she didn't want to put Sarah or anyone else in danger. Her voice trembled, but she tried to remain brave. "Let Sarah go," Emily said. "She has nothing to do with this." The tall man nodded slightly. "We only need you." With fear gripping her, Emily stepped down from the wagon. Sarah held her hand tightly, refusing to let go at first. But one of the outlaws gently separated them. Sarah mouthed, "I'll bring help," before the men forced her to move away. She climbed back on the wagon with tears in her eyes, turned the horse around, and hurried toward town as fast as the trail allowed. Emily watched her friend disappear into the distance. She felt trapped, but she also felt a strange, quiet strength rising inside her. She hoped her father would stay calm and that someone would be able to find her. The outlaws moved quickly through the woods, leading Emily along a hidden path that twisted between tall pines. She noticed they avoided open areas and chose difficult ground to make tracking harder. It became clear that they weren't simple troublemakers. They knew exactly what they were doing. Back in Red Creek, Sarah arrived in a panic. She ran straight to the sheriff's office, her voice shaking as she tried to speak. Sheriff Coleman came rushing out, his calm face turning pale as soon as he heard Emily's name mixed with the word, "taken." He placed a steadying hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Tell me everything," he said softly. Through tears, she explained the whole situation, the sudden appearance of the men, the leader who spoke calmly but firmly, the way they took Emily without causing chaos, and how they seemed to vanish into the trees. The sheriff listened without interrupting. Anyone who knew him could see the storm growing behind his eyes. He was a man who kept his emotions controlled, but the thought of his daughter being in danger shook him in ways nothing else ever had. The townspeople gathered outside as Sarah finished her story. They whispered among themselves, fear spreading as quickly as the news. Everyone cared about Emily, and the idea of outlaws targeting Red Creek felt unreal. Sheriff Coleman walked to the center of the crowd. His voice was steady, but quieter than usual. "They took Emily on purpose," he said. "They want something from me." He did not mention Dalton by name yet, but the adults around him exchanged worried looks. Many had heard the rumors, and now those stories felt painfully real. The sheriff began gathering a small group of men to help search, but he already knew the outlaws would try to hide their tracks. They were trained, experienced, and prepared. A wrong move could cost precious time, and Emily's safety depended on every second. As he prepared to leave, someone stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. It was an Apache tracker named Taza, a man known for his quiet strength and unmatched tracking skills. He had helped people before by finding missing livestock, lost travelers, and even small children who wandered off. But he usually kept to himself, living a peaceful life outside town. Sheriff Coleman looked at him with surprise and a bit of hope. "I will help you," Taza said in a calm voice. "Your daughter should not face danger alone." Those words marked the beginning of a journey that would test courage, trust, and the meaning of honor, because Emily's path had crossed with people who underestimated the strength of those willing to save her. Sheriff Coleman wasted no time once Taza stepped forward. The people of Red Creek had gathered around them, their faces full of fear and uncertainty. They wanted to help, but no one knew which direction to take or how to follow tracks that had been purposely hidden. Everyone looked to the sheriff for guidance, yet even he knew that this mission needed someone with skills beyond ordinary tracking. Taza stood quietly, observing the shaken crowd. His calm eyes moved from face to face until they met the sheriff's. There was respect between them. Built years earlier, when the sheriff had defended Taza, during a misunderstanding with some travelers who had wrongly accused him of wrongdoing. Because of that moment, Taza always felt a sense of trust toward Sheriff Coleman. And now, when he heard that Emily, someone innocent and kind, had been taken, he could not ignore it. The sheriff walked up to him. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low but full of sincerity. Taza nodded once. "Emily is a good person. I have seen how she helps people. I will do everything I can." Some townspeople looked uneasy. A few whispered among themselves, unsure if depending on an outsider was safe. But no one dared speak loudly, because they could see the fear in the sheriff's eyes and knew this was not the time for doubt. The town's safety and Emily's return were more important than any misunderstanding or prejudice. Taza knelt near Sarah's wagon, carefully studying the trail where she had returned from. He placed his palm gently on the dirt and closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to the earth. The crowd fell silent. They watched as he examined small clues that no one else noticed: the direction of broken twigs, the shape of footprints, the thin lines left by the wagon wheels. 4 men, Taza said quietly. They knew how to hide, but they made mistakes in their hurry. A faint relief spread through the sheriff. At least they had a starting point. The sheriff gathered supplies quickly: canteens, blankets, small tools, and enough food for the journey. Several men volunteered to join them. But Taza shook his head. "Too many people will make noise," he said. "Outlaws will hear us from far away." "They are watching," the sheriff agreed. They needed to move fast, quietly, and with precision. Taking a large group would slow them down. In the end, only 3 people set out: Sheriff Coleman, Taza, and a young deputy named Mark, who insisted on joining. Mark had always admired Emily as a friend, and he refused to stay behind. The sheriff hesitated at first. Mark was brave but inexperienced. Still, he allowed him to come after seeing the determination in his eyes. The 3 men left the town quickly, following the path where the wagon had been ambushed. Sarah had pointed out the exact place, and when they reached it, Taza studied the ground again. He walked slowly around the trees, touching the bark, looking at the shadows, and even smelling the air. "Dalton's men moved through here," he said. "They split into 2 groups to confuse anyone following." The sheriff frowned. "Which direction did Emily go?" Taza crouched beside a patch of disturbed soil. He brushed away leaves and stones until he revealed a faint boot print. "This one is Emily's," he said. "They took her east." Mark's eyes widened. "How can you tell?" Taza pointed at a small detail. "She stepped on a soft part of the ground. The shape is smaller. And here." He pointed to another spot. "The outlaws stepped around her to avoid leaving clear tracks." Sheriff Coleman looked at him with admiration. "We'll follow your lead." They began their journey eastward. The land ahead was rough, with stretches of dry grass, scattered rocks, and patches of forest that grew thicker the farther they went. The sun climbed higher, and the heat pressed down on them. The sheriff focused on the trail, his mind filled with worry for Emily. He imagined her walking with strangers, uncertain and afraid. The thought made his chest tighten. Taza noticed the sheriff's silence. "She is strong," he said gently. "She will not lose hope." The sheriff nodded. He appreciated Taza's words more than he could express. Hours passed. The group moved steadily, stopping only when Taza needed to study the ground again. Sometimes he noticed a broken leaf, sometimes a branch bent out of place, and sometimes a small sign left unintentionally. Each clue brought them a little closer. Around midday, Taza paused near a patch of sand. He leaned closer and examined something with great focus. "They changed horses here," he said. "The animals they took had fresh shoes. They want to travel faster." Mark looked worried. "Does that mean they'll get too far ahead?" Taza shook his head. "Fast horses leave deeper marks, and tired horses slow them down later. They rush too much. This will help us." The sheriff felt some hope returning. A few hours later, they reached a dry stream bed. The land here felt different, quiet, in a heavy way. Taza stopped again. "They went this way," he said, pointing up a narrow, twisting path between 2 hills. "But something else." He bent down and touched the ground. They left someone behind for a short time. A guard. Mark stiffened. Is he still close? No, Taza replied. He left when he heard your friend's wagon. They knew someone escaped. Sheriff Coleman clenched his jaw. They're preparing. They know we're coming. Taza nodded. Dalton will expect you. But he does not expect me. The sheriff stared at him with a quiet gratitude. Taza's confidence felt like a guiding light in the growing darkness of the situation. As evening approached, the land turned cooler. The sky shifted into shades of orange and gold. The men stopped briefly to rest, sitting under a cluster of trees. Mark drank water and asked, "Why would Dalton take Emily? What does he want?" The sheriff finally spoke about what he had feared. Dalton wanted to force him to release one of his men who had been captured weeks earlier. That man had been involved in a robbery that harmed several families, and the law had sentenced him fairly. Dalton's gang wanted revenge and leverage. Emily was their answer. Mark shook his head. But Emily never harmed anyone. That is why Dalton chose her, the sheriff said quietly. Because she is innocent. Silence fell over them. The sheriff's pain was visible, and Mark felt it deeply. Taza remained calm, watching the sun fall lower. We should move again before dark, Taza finally said. They will think the night slows us down, but darkness can hide us too. They continued their journey as daylight faded. The shadows grew longer, and the sounds around them changed. Crickets chirped, and a soft breeze rustled the branches. The moon slowly rose above the horizon, its pale light guiding their path. Taza examined the trail under moonlight with surprising ease. His eyes seemed to understand the land even in dim conditions. He followed slight patterns the way dust settled, the direction of bent grass, the faint marks left by horseshoes. Then he stopped suddenly. The sheriff walked up behind him. What is it? Taza pointed to a broken branch. Emily passed through here recently. She brushed against this. The sheriff touched the branch gently. It gave him a fragile, comforting hope. How recent? An hour, Taza replied. Maybe less. Mark's heartbeat quickened. We're close? Yes, Taza said. But we must be careful now. Dalton's men will be watching. They moved slower now. Every step taken with purpose. Taza motioned for silence. Even their breathing softened as they followed him through the trees. Ahead, the forest opened into a rocky area. The moonlight shined more clearly there. Taza raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He whispered softly, "They camped not far from here." The sheriff looked around. "How do you know?" Taza showed them a small sign, a single strand of Emily's light-colored hair caught on a branch. The sheriff's eyes grew emotional as he held it gently. It was undeniable proof she had passed through. Taza walked a few steps ahead and sniffed the air lightly, then pointed to the right. Smoke. Very little. They tried to hide their fire, but the wind carried the scent. Mark whispered, "Are we going in tonight?" "Not all of us," Taza said. "I will go closer. I need to see their numbers and their positions." The sheriff felt uneasy. "It's dangerous," Taza nodded calmly. "Yes. But if we rush without knowing, it becomes worse." The sheriff hesitated but eventually agreed. He knew Taza was their only chance to approach without drawing notice. Taza removed his heavier gear, keeping only what he needed to move quietly. His steps were silent as he disappeared into the darkness like a shadow blending with the land. Sheriff Coleman and Mark waited behind a large boulder, the silence stretching out like an endless thread. Time felt slow, and the sheriff's worry grew stronger. His thoughts kept circling around Emily. Was she afraid? Was she hurt? He wanted to run forward, but he forced himself to trust Taza. After what felt like a long time, Taza returned. His expression was serious. "They have Emily," he said. "She is safe for now. But Dalton plans to move her again by sunrise. If they reach the canyon ahead, rescue will become harder." The sheriff understood the danger instantly. The canyon Taza mentioned was known for its narrow paths and steep cliffs. It would be almost impossible to launch a rescue there without alerting the whole gang. Taza looked the sheriff directly in the eyes. "We must act before dawn. And we must move quietly. Only then can we reach her without causing harm." The sheriff nodded. "We'll do whatever it takes." With the night deepening around them, the three men prepared for what lay ahead. Taza had given them direction, hope, and a plan. And with that, part 2 of their long journey came to an end, leading them into an even more dangerous phase, one where every decision would matter and every moment could change. Night covered the land like a dark blanket as Sheriff Coleman, Taza, and young Mark prepared for the hardest part of their journey. The sky was filled with stars, quiet and distant. As if watching from above, a cool breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint smell of dust and pine. The men rested for only a short time because dawn would come soon, and Taza had warned them that Dalton planned to move Emily by sunrise. Every minute mattered. Taza led them forward again, moving with light steps, almost soundless. Sheriff Coleman admired how smoothly the Apache tracker blended into the land. It was as if he understood the earth, the wind, and even the night itself. Mark followed behind them, determined not to slow anyone down. He was nervous but also focused. The thought of Emily being held by strangers pushed him onward. The terrain grew rougher. Large rocks covered parts of the path, forcing them to climb carefully. Dry branches cracked under their feet if they weren't careful. Taza paused often, lifting his hand to signal silence. He checked the ground, the slopes, and the shadows for any sign of movement. At one point, he studied a narrow path leading between two hills. "They went this way," he whispered. "The soil is fresh here, and the tracks are deeper. The horses are tired." The sheriff felt a mixture of hope and fear. If the outlaws were getting tired, it meant they were slowing down, but it also meant they might become desperate, making them unpredictable. As they moved deeper into this rocky area, the land began to change. The space around them widened into a dry, open plain with scattered bushes and tall grass. The moonlight made the plain look silver. In the distance, the sheriff could see the outline of a canyon stretching long and deep. Taza noticed it too. "They are heading for that canyon," Taza said. "It is narrow, and has only one main way in and out. They think it will protect them." The sheriff frowned. "Will it?" "It protects them," Taza replied. "But it traps them too. If we move carefully, we can reach them before they prepare." Mark scanned the horizon nervously. "What if they hear us coming?" Taza shook his head. "They believe the night is their shield. They think no one can follow their tracks here. That is why we still have a chance." They continued walking. The ground became uneven again, rising and falling in shallow hills. Sometimes they had to climb over fallen logs or step around sharp rocks. The sheriff wondered what Emily was going through at that moment. Was she cold? Was she frightened? Or was she staying strong, believing her father would come? Taza suddenly crouched low and touched the ground. The sheriff and Mark halted behind him. "She is close," Taza whispered. They stopped here to rest. "This footprint," he pointed carefully, "belongs to Emily." Sheriff Coleman bent down and looked. The small print was clear in the soft dirt. He felt a tightness in his chest. She was alive. She had walked right here. That simple fact gave him the strength to move forward with greater determination. They followed the trail for another hour until Taza noticed something unusual. A small worry line appeared on his forehead. "They are trying to hide their trail," he said. "They dragged branches across the ground to cover tracks." Mark sighed. "That means we're close. They don't want to be found." "Yes," Taza said softly. "And it means they may know someone is following." This made the sheriff even more alert. Every sound around them seemed louder now, the rustle of wind, the crunch of small stones, the movement of distant animals. The night grew colder. Their breaths became visible in the moonlight. The sheriff wrapped his coat tighter, but he didn't complain. He couldn't think about comfort. His mind was fixed on one thing, Emily. Finally, they reached the entrance of the canyon just before dawn. The light in the sky had changed from dark blue to a pale gray, showing that morning was coming soon. Taza stopped behind a large rock and motioned for the others to take cover. "They are camped inside," he said calmly. "I saw smoke earlier, rising from this direction." "What do we do now?" Mark asked in a whisper. Taza looked at both of them. "This canyon is dangerous. The walls are high, and sound travels easily. If we walk in too quickly, they will hear us." Sheriff Coleman nodded. "Then we move slowly." Taza shook his head. "I will go in first, alone." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "We stay together." "If we go together," Taza explained gently, "they will hear us. But if only one person enters quietly, he can reach the camp without warning anyone." Mark swallowed hard. "But it's too risky." Taza's expression stayed steady. "It is the only way." The sheriff hesitated. He trusted Taza deeply, but the idea of letting him walk into danger alone made his heart sink. Still, he knew Taza was right. He was the only one skilled enough to move silently through the narrow canyon path. "Be careful," the sheriff finally said. Taza nodded once, then slipped into the canyon with silent, graceful steps. The sheriff and Mark stayed behind the rock, waiting in tense silence. Minutes felt like hours. The sheriff stared toward the canyon entrance, praying silently that Taza would return safely and with good news. Inside the canyon, Taza moved carefully along the narrow path. The walls rose high on both sides, and the faint sound of wind echoed softly. He kept close to the rock walls, avoiding loose stones that might roll and make noise. He knew the outlaws had ears trained for danger. Any slip could bring trouble. As he moved deeper, he saw faint signs of the camp. A small fire pit, burned to ashes, some boot prints, a piece of rope, and then something more personal. Emily's small shawl, lying on a bush. Taza touched the fabric gently and then hid it inside his coat. He would give it to the sheriff later. Taza inched forward until he finally saw them. Dalton's men were gathered near a cluster of rocks inside a wider area of the canyon. Their horses were tied nearby, looking tired. A few men were sleeping, while others were keeping watch but not very carefully. They looked exhausted from traveling most of the night. And there, tied loosely near the center of the camp, sat Emily. She was awake, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked tired and pale, but not harmed. Taza felt relief. She was safe for now. But Dalton himself stood close by, talking quietly with two men. The conversation was too soft to hear, but Taza could read their expressions. They were uneasy. One of the men pointed toward the canyon entrance, and Taza realized they knew someone might be following. They were planning to move soon. Taza retreated carefully and returned to the sheriff and Mark just as the sun began to rise. "They are inside," Taza said quietly. "Emily is safe, but they will move soon. We must act before they leave." "Of 5 is mine." Sheriff Coleman stood. "What's the plan?" "We must approach quietly," Taza explained. "I will go first and free Emily. When I move her out, you both come in from the side and keep watch." Mark nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. "We can do that." The sheriff took a deep breath. "Let's finish this." The three moved into the canyon with slow, careful steps. Taza led the way, staying near the walls. The sheriff followed a few feet behind, and Mark stayed close as well. Every sound felt louder in their ears, the crunch of small stones, the rustle of clothing. The canyon seemed to hold its breath with them. As they reached the corner leading into the camp area, Taza motioned for them to stop. He peered around the rocks, studying the positions of the outlaws. 2 were awake, 3 were sleeping, and Dalton stood not far from Emily. Taza whispered, "I will go in now. Wait for my signal." He slid forward quietly, almost melting into the shadows. The sheriff watched with admiration and fear. Taza's movements were so smooth that even the rocks seemed not to notice him. When Taza reached Emily, she gasped quietly as he appeared beside her. He placed a finger over his lips, signaling her to stay silent. Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of relief. Someone had come. Her father had sent help, Taza gently cut the rope around her wrists and whispered, "Stay behind me. Move when I tell you." Emily nodded quickly. Taza led her away from the center of the camp. They were almost near the exit when suddenly a loose stone rolled under Emily's foot. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet canyon, it echoed just enough for one outlaw to blink awake. His eyes widened as he spotted movement. Taza grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her behind a rock. The outlaw shouted, "Someone's here." In an instant, the quiet morning turned into chaos. The sheriff heard the shout and rushed forward, calling out Emily's name. Mark ran behind him, heart pounding. Taza stepped out of the shadows, shielding Emily from view. The outlaws scrambled for their weapons. Dalton's face twisted with shock when he saw Taza and the sheriff entering the camp. Taza moved quickly, guiding Emily toward safety as the sheriff confronted the gang. The canyon echoed with shouts, movement, and the scrambling of footsteps, but Sheriff Coleman had reached his daughter. And that was all that mattered. Part 3 ended with danger rising, but hope stronger than ever because now, Emily was not alone. The sun was sinking behind the western hills when Lone Hawk and Mariah finally stood on the ridge that overlooked the dusty trail leading back to Willow Creek. The sky burned with warm colors: orange, gold, and soft pink. Yet neither of them felt any comfort from the beauty around them. They were tired, dusty, and carrying the heavy weight of everything they had gone through. Mariah looked down at the small town in the distance. Tiny houses, a few scattered barns, and the sheriff's office sat quietly, as if the world had not changed. But for her, everything was different. She had left the town as an unsuspecting girl following a simple errand. She was returning as someone who had seen hardship, danger, and courage in its truest form. Lone Hawk stood beside her silently. He did not rush her or speak unnecessary words. He simply let her breathe in the moment. The wind tugged gently at his dark braid as he watched the town with careful eyes, making sure no threats lingered in the shadows. "You sure you're ready to go back?" he finally asked, his voice low and calm. Mariah nodded, even though her heart trembled a little. "I'm ready. And I'm not afraid anymore." She meant those words. She had faced fear in its darkest shape and survived. And she had done it with someone she had once been told to fear, but now trusted more than anyone she had ever known. Lone Hawk gave a small nod, then motioned for them to move. They made their way down the ridge, walking slowly because Mariah's ankle still hurt, and Lone Hawk had several bruises from the fights with the outlaws. But neither of them complained. They simply moved forward, step by step, toward home. As they walked, Mariah found her thoughts drifting back to the cabin where she had been held. She remembered the cold nights, the hopeless hours, and the moments when she thought she would never see her father again. But all those dark memories were overshadowed by one shining truth. Lone Hawk had come for her. He had risked everything. He had fought, tracked, and endured hardship without any promise of reward. It was a kind of bravery she had never witnessed before. The trail leveled out, and soon they reached the small wooden bridge that crossed the shallow creek before the town. The water below sparkled under the fading sunlight. Mariah paused again, feeling her heart beat faster. She knew that once they crossed this bridge, she would be home. Her father would be there. Her friends would rush to see if she was safe. The town would breathe again. But it also meant something else: she and Lone Hawk would soon part ways. She didn't want to think about that. Lone Hawk noticed her hesitation. "Your father will be waiting," he said gently. "He has not slept since you were taken." "I know," she whispered. I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," he replied, "by walking out of those woods alive." But she shook her head. "No. You saved me. If not for you, I would never have made it out. I'll never forget that." For the first time, Lone Hawk looked slightly uncomfortable, as if he didn't know how to respond to kindness. He simply nodded again and stepped back, giving her the chance to cross the bridge first. As they entered the edge of Willow Creek, Mariah felt a sudden rush of emotion. Lights flickered through the windows of houses. A few horses stood tied outside the saloon. A couple of dogs barked in the distance. Everything was familiar, yet it felt new, as if she was seeing it for the first time. Suddenly, the door of the sheriff's office burst open. Sheriff Tom Weaver ran out, his face pale and tired but filled with hope. When he saw Mariah, he stopped in his tracks, as if his heart needed a moment to believe what his eyes were seeing. "Mariah?" he breathed. "Papa!" she cried. She ran the last few steps despite the pain in her ankle. The sheriff caught her in his arms and held her tightly, lifting her slightly off the ground. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Sheriff Weaver buried his face in her hair, and Mariah felt tears drip onto her shoulder. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm safe." When they finally pulled apart, the sheriff looked over her shoulder and saw Lone Hawk standing quietly a few paces away. The sheriff's expression changed not with suspicion, but with deep gratitude. He approached Lone Hawk slowly. "You brought my daughter home," he said. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You owe nothing," Lone Hawk replied. "I only did what was right." But the sheriff shook his head. "What you did takes courage and heart." A few townspeople had gathered now, whispering to one another. Some looked at Lone Hawk with uncertainty, unsure of how to react. But when Mariah stepped beside him and said, "He saved my life," many of those doubtful expressions softened instantly. The blacksmith stepped forward, tipping his hat. "Then, he's a friend of this town," he said. Others nodded in agreement. Even Sheriff Weaver placed a firm hand on Lone Hawk's shoulder, showing a respect that crossed every boundary. Still, Lone Hawk seemed restless. "The Outlaws," he said. "They will come again." Their leader escaped into the hills. The sheriff's face hardened. "We'll be ready for him, and if you're willing, I'd like you to help us track him down." Lone Hawk hesitated. He was not used to working with towns, not used to being invited. But he saw Mariah watching him, her eyes full of trust, and he felt something shift quietly inside himself. "I will help," he said. That night, the town gathered in the sheriff's yard. A fire burned in the center, giving warmth to the cool evening. People brought bread, stew, and hot coffee. They wanted to celebrate Mariah's safe return, but they also wanted to honor the man who had risked everything to bring her back. Mariah sat beside her father, wrapped in a blanket. She watched as Lone Hawk sat alone near the fire, eating quietly. Children stared at him with curiosity, whispering to one another. The townspeople stole glances, unsure of how to approach someone who had lived such a different life from theirs. Finally, Mariah stood and walked over to him. "Do you mind if I sit?" she asked. He shook his head, and she settled beside him. "Thank you for staying," she said. "I will leave tomorrow," he answered. "The hills call me back." Mariah felt a small ache in her chest. She didn't want him to leave. Not yet. "Will you ever come back?" He looked into the fire, the light reflecting in his calm eyes. "Perhaps," he said, "if there is need. There will always be a place for you here," she said softly. A quiet moment stretched between them. It wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was warm, gentle, like a bond between two people who had survived something much bigger than themselves. When the fire burned low and the town began to drift to sleep, Mariah walked Lone Hawk to the edge of town. The moon shone brightly over the open land. A soft wind brushed the grass. "Goodbye, Lone Hawk," she whispered. "Not goodbye," he replied, "just until the wind brings our paths together again." With that, he turned toward the hills, his steps silent and steady. Mariah watched him go until he was only a small shadow against the moonlit land. She knew he was a man who belonged to the open world, to the wind and stars, but she also knew something else. His story was now tied to hers in a way that could never be undone. When she returned home that night, she felt a deep peace settle inside her. She was safe. Her father was safe, and somewhere out in the wilderness, a brave tracker walked under the same sky, carrying their shared story with him. The people of Willow Creek would talk about him for years. They would tell the tale of the sheriff's daughter, the Outlaws, and the Apache tracker who staked his life to save her. And every time Mariah heard the story, she would smile softly, remembering the truth behind every word. In the end, The story was not about danger, or fear, or loss. It was about courage, trust, and the unexpected bond between two very different souls, brought together by fate. And that bond, quiet and unspoken, would live on long after the dust of that wild adventure had settled.